Welcome. This is a webinar on supplier tactics for winning or just taking part in your next reverse auction. My name's Alun Rafique and I'm with Craig. We'll introduce ourselves in a second. The webinar will be about an hour or so. It should be an exciting webinar, as exciting as British politics, maybe. We'll see. Feel free, it's interactive, so feel free to ask questions via the chat, and we'll answer them as we go along. We have Toby, who's our webmaster here, who's helping us with this webinar. So my name's Alun Rafique, I'm one of the co-founders of Market Dojo. We set up Market Dojo about 9 years ago to make e-auctions more accessible to a wider audience. So I'm hoping it's going to be a lot of fun. We've learned a lot over the years, and Market Dojo do a lot more than that now, but we've certainly learned a lot and wanted to share some of those findings with you today. My background is as an engineer, and I worked in procurement and consultancy, so I've had a good round in all those kind of areas. And so over to Craig.
Yeah, and my name's Craig. I'm the marketing manager at Market Dojo. I joined Market Dojo around 4 years ago now. And during that time, we've grown in terms of the business and the products that we offer. And I've seen a lot of, in terms of the support side of things, a huge amount of tenders that I've kind of assisted and aided in, whether it's an international news channel that we had in North Africa, which was fantastic, to green roofs and golf carts put for our talk. So that's a little bit of background into myself.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Craig. Yeah, so it should be a lot of fun today. It should be a lot of interesting. Just a very quick introduction to Market Dojo. As I say, we do a lot more now, just to really show we've got the experience in the area. We focus on helping procurement professionals with the tools to help with e-sourcing and supplier engagement. In other words, we provide user-friendly on-demand tools to help procurement professionals collect information and negotiate with suppliers, for good or for bad. We'll find out. So if you do want to afterwards nudge us towards your procurement teams, that would be helpful. Although the aim of this webinar today is to help suppliers, yourselves, interact with an auction. There's a lot of techniques you can understand to help you with that. Before we start, we're going to have a quick poll. We've got a poll at the end, so we want to know what you think. Toby's going to press play on the poll here. So what we'd be interested to know is, do you view e-auctions as an opportunity for new business? Do you see it as a viable negotiation method? Is it a necessary evil of life, or perhaps a bad practice? We've heard a full range of views for a full range of reasons. Obviously, auctions have been around for a long time now. They first came about with free markets who used to charge about £250,000 to run an e-auction, and now someone can run an auction on our tool for £500. And I think there's been a challenge as auctions have moved from the hands of consultants to kind of general procurement buyers in getting the correct methodology right. At Market Dojo, we obviously believe it's a great tool to use at the right point in time. And so what's going to be very interesting, if you could please just select one of these options, and I think we're going to give the results straight away and see what people think before we go through the various bits and pieces. So how are we doing, Toby, on the
68%?
68%. So 68% of you have filled in the answers. If you can. Just kind of click the buttons if you can, and we'll end the results in a few minutes. Here we go. So let's see. Are we close to it?
79.
79. We'll just give it another few seconds. I mean, it's very interesting. People kind of see auctions as they can be very useful. They can be good feedback. I mean, personally, when I was running tenders for Rolls-Royce. We used to get the results and not feed anything back. Just you knew if you won or not. With an auction, that you get the results and whether what position you arrive in. However, that can be a bit of an Achilles heel. Maybe people don't want to know that. I'm not sure. But let's take a look at the results then. How are we doing? Okay, so I mean that's fantastic. I mean, there is a question here. The people who are engaged in this webinar, have you engaged with them before? You know, is it something which you're very proactive about? But that's wonderful to see that most people see it as an opportunity or a viable negotiation method. You know, necessary evil and a bad practice. You know, there are obviously reasons for that, and hopefully we'll have some questions on the webinar around that side of things. So that should be really great to get into some of that detail. But that's brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for taking part in that poll. Let's go to our next slide, if it lets me. Here we go. So, what are the objectives for you in an e-auction? Win the opportunity for business. So it's a kind of obvious statement, but I've changed that from win an e-auction to win the opportunity for business. You don't have to be in first place. There's always the renewal. You always want to put your best foot forward. You want to win that opportunity whilst making the buyer feel that they have achieved success. And that's really important. You know, buyers are human beings. They have motivations, they have needs, they have a career path. They might have put their neck out to take a contract which has just been stagnant, up for renewal via an auction. They've probably gone out to the business and secured money to use a tool such as these. So it's important that you think about how they feel, because that will ultimately put you in a better position. And also, I think it's you know, obtaining the most feedback for yourselves from the e-auction. You can learn a lot from an auction in terms of how you bid. So it's really important, actually, as you bid, we'll go through this, how you can get the most feedback. I think Craig's put another interesting slide next, actually.
Yes, so I mean, in terms of an auction opportunity, often we hear from suppliers, and I've interviewed suppliers myself to discover that a lot of the time there is a concept of, you know, potentially a loss and an opportunity to lose because of they've been working with an established buyer, for a number of years, and now that relationship has been put to an sourcing event. So one of the key focuses for us is to get people who are, you guys listening, to really understand that auctions are also an opportunity to lose that relationship and that trust between the buyer and supplier. So that relationship you spent years building, and there's very simple ways which we'll go through in this webinar to ensure that people really understand that, you know, that business and the vast amount of business that you've achieved by working with them, that you don't have, you know, examples as you can see on your screen is, you know, flawed bid strategy, or not taking part in their auctions, or essentially not showing the value that you do give to these buyers and to these hosts, because there could be a detrimental impact of you not doing, you know, your best and your part to really bring that trust and that relationship and making that open to the other stakeholders of the business.
Yeah, I mean, auctions are meant to be very, excuse me, transparent if they're done well, and you know, it's more advantageous to take part than not. You might not maybe enjoy the part that they've taken into auction, but you can, by working closely with what the buyer wants, you can certainly influence it more to how you'd like it to be. And we'll come a bit onto that as we go. What are we going to cover today? Well, we'll cover a bit about what the host, when the host is the person running the tender, what they're trying to achieve, some of the groundwork around specifications and the e-auction type, opening bids and the current bid, how to start bidding, messaging, involving your supply chain, margins, the incumbent, which you may be, relationships, the bigger picture, and what guides we have to offer. So let's, without further ado, I think we're passing over to Craig here.
Fantastic.
There we go.
Well, one of the key things for us that when we sat down and when we thought about this was really understanding what the host is looking for. Obviously, it's vitally important to you guys as suppliers when you're competing and trying to take part in an auction to understand the fundamentals and go back to the basics of what it is that the host, the buyer, is looking for in that scenario. Now, the first one that we've got on the list there, you can see it's savings. It's pretty simple. You know, at the end of the day, the host, the buyer, is trying to arrange an e-sourcing event because they want to get the best value for their business, and that normally comes at a savings opportunity. So that's obviously the key framework that has to be in their mind. You know, the next step is essentially the more options with the suppliers that they've got. Now, if you guys take a look at the graph in front of you, I'll just kind of explain that very briefly. You can see that that is essentially a bid compression of suppliers, showing their qualification bid, which is their initial bid for the auction, and their bid at the very end of the auction is in their last and final offer. And you can see the price compression that's shown, which is obviously a real indicator to the host who's running the event that, you know, suppliers are competing, that they're reaching market price. And so that's a very big point that hosts are looking for when they're arranging an event, is to really see that you guys are interacting, you are connecting, and that they are hitting the market value, because the market value is the best they can purchase for, and one that's suitable for you guys as suppliers and them as hosts as well. The next one is another kind of just a fundamental basic concept of that, you know, there is their own personal success on the line. Now, you know, we're all professionals, and I think procurement professionals in particular, you know, it is a start of their career. It is a point at which they're growing and developing their own careers. And, you know, obviously running e-sourcing events is a tool within their armory and abilities that they can do within their role. So that's kind of a really important thing to understand. And you know, within that comes the next point of looking good in front of the team. Now, you know, we all care about our reputation and value our reputation within teams and organizations. So for them, it's very important that, you know, what they're getting out is they're essentially making sure that the e-sourcing event comes out in a positive outlook, and that you guys as suppliers are looking good, they're looking good as hosts, and the other stakeholders in the business can really understand the impact of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to benefit their organization. And finally, you know, the supplier impression. You know, and I say this because this is probably the fundamental thing. You know, there's other stakeholders within a business, and a lot of companies that you guys probably take part in these sourcing events. You know, you'll probably take part and have a relationship with the host or the individual. But it's also about showing that to the rest of the organization. And an e-sourcing event is a very auditable, effective way of showing relationships and showing bids between, you know, suppliers and a number of different suppliers, and ensuring that, you know, you're following best practice. So that's kind of initial.
Yeah, some really good points there. I mean, especially the kind of things like the award criteria. So, you know, but even though an auction might be based on price or multi-criteria, the award criteria is really important. So a lot of auctions are normally run on a buyer's choice basis, where they say, look, the person in front is most favourable, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win the business. So normally when they reduce or they expand their options by looking at the market price, they then look at those options and say, well, let's take the top 3 suppliers in, for example. So the award criteria is very important to look at. Is it strictly number 1 wins, or is it you're most favourable? That's very important. Most auctions that we've seen run are on a buyer's choice basis.
Fantastic. And the next part that we've got in the screen, which you should see in front of you in a moment, is the specification. Now, obviously, once you start to really understand what the host is trying to achieve from an e-sourcing event, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. And the first part of that is what it is they're looking for. Now, we've kind of broken this down into 2 different ways. And we'll start with kind of what we're going to call the groundworks, the specification side of things of an event. Now, you know, what is a specification? It's what they need, why do they need it, what the requirements and what conditions need to be specifically met. You know, are they looking at non-price elements such as quality, you know, all those other service things, whether it's delivery, etc. And, you know, is there room for interpretation within that? You know, a classic example is something like, you know, office supplies that we see through our tool quite regularly. You know, is there the ability to offer different types of pens, different types of specifications that they're looking for? You know, does it matter if it's a ballpoint or a fountain pen? You know, these things might matter, but it's really understanding that specification that they're providing you, or that they've met out, to ensure that you can take part and make the most of an event. And finally, you know, one big part of that we discussed, myself and Alan, was, you know, how complex are they? How complex is their need and them as a business? You know, a great example I heard the other day was of, you know, a Hoover and a jet engine, because, you know, fundamentally they do two very similar things. They both convert power into motion, but each have very different risks and very different, specifications when you're e-sourcing or running an e-sourcing event or any kind of event into the purchasing of it, because there is very different, whether it's health and safety regulations, or there's just very different elements that need to be taken into account within the specification so that you guys can get the best out of it. But it's also really, really important for you guys as suppliers to ensure that you're meeting the buyer's criteria and really understand what it is that they want.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and also ask the right questions. So, if you've noticed a problem with the spec, don't keep it to yourself, because you might end up pricing into it, and you're being compared against other suppliers who are bidding, and they might not know about this issue of the specification. You need to make sure everyone's bidding like for like to give yourself the best opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, the next fundamental part of the groundworks that we call here is the e-auction type. Now, this goes for a number of different elements, and in terms of e-sourcing events larger, you could have RFI, RFP, RFQ, so request for information, request for proposal, request for quotation. But today we're focusing on e-auctions because that's what we know that people tend to get the most value out. So in terms of e-auctions, the first very simple concept is understanding what is a forward auction and what is a reverse auction. Now, the forward auction, the prices is going up. So if you want to think of something like eBay, that I'm sure we've all experienced, over the last 10, 15 years or so, in comparison with normal B2B organization events, which tend to be a reverse auction. So you guys as suppliers are competing and lowering the price to be able to win the business. So that's kind of the first thing you really need to understand. The next aspect is in terms of the e-auction structure itself. Now, there's a number of different types. We're going to hit on three quickly. There's ranked, there's open, and there's Japanese. Now, ranked is when suppliers are ranked and notified of their rank, but not of their competitors. So it's the most common type of e-auction type that we see, and it's ensuring that you know exactly where you are placed, and as a bidder, as a supplier within an event, you can ensure that you can compete and lower that price to make yourself number one. And once you're ranked first in the event, you know exactly where you are. So that's what ranked is in a bit of a nutshell. Open is, as it seems, it is where suppliers can see the difference in the price between them and the leading competitor's bid. So there is more open information to be gained and that they can see.
Like very much like eBay in reverse, isn't it?
Exactly. And the final type is Japanese, where the price is decreasing in specific increments over time. So you can choose to opt out of a round or stay in and bid to the next round. So they're kind of three fundamental structures. And then obviously it impacts very much in terms of you as a bidder, how you can get the most out of an e-sourcing event, but how it's structured. So that's kind of a simple concept that we kind of try to make sure that you guys are aware of. The next point, as you can see on the slide, is the weighting. Now, if you guys haven't heard of weighting, it's quite a simple concept. It's essentially taking other values into account when bidding. So if you want to think of something like a Ferrari. Now, you might want to take into more qualities than just, is it a car? You might want to take into the fact that, it's a very nice red sports car. And you might want to ensure that essentially is calculated into the value that it is offering. So typically we see this through something like a scored questionnaire before an auction, but it's essentially taken into values. Quality is the most popular one, but we've seen it through deliveries, we've seen it through service levels, and a number of different
I mean, it's essentially looking at the price and the non-price elements to give a weighted score.
Now, another fundamental aspect of an e-auction type is, another fundamental area that we try to make sure you guys are aware of is what we've got in front of us, saying the rank shenanigans. Now, what we mean by this is we mean to ensure that you have an idea of where you are, who the leading bidder is, and if there is any kind of blind bid at the end.
I think the point of this area here is, we do other auction types as well. Sorry, we don't do any other auction types apart from the ones there, but there are other auction types out there. These are the main ones. What we've seen with some of our competitors necessarily is they do some kind of rank shenanigans. Halfway through the auction, they might hide the lead bid or hide the rank, or they might have a blind period at the end. It's not something that we subscribe to in terms of we just more just open, honest, transparent in terms of that respect. And so you know what you're bidding against throughout the whole of the auction. However, some auction tools do other things which you need to make sure and be aware of before you get into the auction. Ask for a video of the auction type, ask for the rules of it, and that's very important.
Exactly. And a couple of other kind of small things to pay attention to that can really help you guys make the most out of your resourcing event is looking at some elements such as the minimum bid decrement. So essentially the bid value at which you can do, which is the lowest from your previous bid. So if you were bidding £1 and you wanted to reduce to 90p, whether there is an acceptable decrement of the 10% that you could bid that value. Obviously, this is very important and it reflects your strategy a little bit later on that we'll talk about. But it's something that really you need to understand in terms of when an auction's set up, because it will very much impact the strategy that you're doing and how you can take advantage within an auction scenario to ensure that you're the most competitive out there. The next one is fairly obvious. It's time. We've had hosts who are hosting an event, buyers who are trying to organize an event, and sometimes they can have an auction that might last 15 minutes. Other times it could be a day. So with the very start of the auction, you should be looking through the overview, understanding, all right, what the time is the event, how long is it going to last, am I going to be able to do it? Because if an event lasts for 4 days, I'm sure you guys aren't going to be strapped to your computer waiting all that time. And it's not very common, it really isn't, but it's obviously an important aspect to understand because it may impact you and your decision and how you can get the most out of an auction. The next one that we've got is the dynamic close period, which is a functionality that we ourselves offer that some others in the market offer, and it is very important. Dynamic close is essentially additional time that's put on at the end of an auction to be extended if a competitive bid is produced. So that's essentially an extension. If you think of the likes of eBay, there used to be this final round of bidding at the very end of an auction where people would try and compete as quickly as possible and put their final bid and just try and reduce that bid by 30% to win. This is something that essentially we try to avoid because it doesn't help in terms of transparency for you or the host. So there is this extension period at the end, and understanding that is quite.
I think everyone hates sniping in eBay, isn't it?
Yes.
No one likes being sniped. We don't have that in our tool. Well, you can take off the dynamic close, but the point being is most people run the dynamic close.
Exactly, and finally, lastly, I'll cover these very quickly. But it's the changes in position, which is obviously quite evident. But as well as the messaging from the host and the system, and ensuring that you're aware of the messaging system that is coming in, so that you can see exactly who's messaging in, if the host is messaging you, where it appears, and how to respond to that fairly quickly. Because in an auction period, it's a very crucial time restrictive environment in which you need to be on it all the time and understand what communication that is being produced. Now, the next slide we're going to talk through quickly is the current bids and opening bids. Obviously this is prior to the commencement of the actual auction bidding. So normally this would be in your qualification bid stage. So this could be launched from an RFQ, or it could just be the first initial bids that you put in at the start of an auction. Now, there is some very simple and important concepts that we hope you guys are learning from this can understand that will really help you get the most and win more and more auctions and e-sourcing events. And some of the basic things is understanding how to position yourself. The host is seeing the bids and the bids level that you're producing. So a fundamental idea is to make sure that your perception is one of good and positive, really. You don't want to be that possession of that person who puts a first and final offer, and them realizing that you're not, a flexible supplier who can work with what it is they're desiring. But you also want to give the perception that you're kind of strong and reactive, but you don't want to be dropping your price all the time and turning a 1 hour long auction into a 6 hour auction, because that can make a real difference in terms of the host and maybe affect their decision. Because they might decide, actually, I want someone who I can communicate with effectively and be flexible with, rather than just someone who's constantly bidding down and delaying an auction just for the sake of trying to get that little bit more information. Obviously, initial savings is another important concept to understand. You know, can you offer early initial savings for hosts, and that they can ensure that you negotiate further? Obviously, if you're way off in terms of any auction event and it started and it's going into the last 5 minutes, and there are still a couple of people bidding and coming down in price level, but you're way off, then the host might view it and might have this perception that you're not really interested in auctions. So it's important to allow them to understand that you're in this together and you're trying to be flexible to their needs. And the final point in terms of your opening bids and the qualification bids was gaining the most feedback from an auction. And I know Alan's going to talk about this a little bit further on, but by having a ranked auction event, you can understand where you are in comparison to the others. So you could understand, all right, well, I've gone from 15th to 1st. So you could almost place on a map, on a graph, sorry, exactly where the competitors are and understand, all right, how many people are being really competitive over this lot and how can you become more competitive. And the final aspect on this in terms of equal bids on a ranked event is, there's a fundamental structure to what happens with a ranked, with equal bids. Is it equal last? So if myself and Alan were to bid for bid at the exact same price level, do we both appear as second or do we both appear as first? So, obviously, you guys probably don't want to, lose every bit of your margin. So it's an important area in which you can see yourself and you can really reduce down, but understand, all right, well, where am I in this ranking system? Am I actually joint first or am I, third with somebody else? So that's a little bit of summary.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really kind of exciting bit here. So you can imagine you're about to go into an auction, either before the auction or how the auction starts. Your opening bids are really important. Don't misunderstand that. You need to understand or think about what is the buyer thinking. We've had auctions that have, we've seen auctions, I should say, which have probably got to the same result as they're going to anyway, but the suppliers come in with their best bid first. There's nothing wrong with that. But we've heard the buyer go, oh God, I've got this auction tool, and then the supplier went down immediately. Did I need the auction tool? Have I spent money on this when I didn't need to do? And I know it might sound maybe a bit of a showboating to show how you can come down an auction, but you can't get away that everyone's got their own personal motivations, how the buyer sees the auction, what happens. They might have 20 people watching their first auction, and reality, what they'd probably like to see is the same result, but they'd like to see that interaction, which is the reason for it all. So even though it might sound a bit out of kilter to say that, having to think what they see is really important. And also the point Craig mentions about maybe, also if you don't come down first initially, you might get to see more about who's in the auction, how they're bidding. You might have an idea who your competitors are. You can get a lot from it if you think about what's going on during an auction. It's a really, if you think about it more and more, I'm sure you'll start thinking about ways that you can gain feedback. Okay, so this one, this is over to myself. Okay, so there you are. You're going to start bidding. What are you trying to achieve? What does the buyer want to see? That's what we've just kind of touched upon. What feedback you're giving to the buyer. But the other points are, we've been auctioned ourselves, in all fairness, using an auction tool to supply an auction tool, which is quite amusing. I'd like to say that the last one we did, we won. I think we won everyone that we've done so far. And a lot of that is to do with the perception and understanding. If you bid slowly and carefully, and you understand what the other suppliers are doing, you will get more feedback. Even if you don't win, you'll pull something valuable for putting your time into this exercise. Keep an eye on when the position changes, how the position changes, how long it takes you to catch up. Be warned about tied bids, as Craig mentioned. You might be, if you're both in the lead and equal, you might be equal second or equal first. A lot of buyers like equal second because it means that suppliers know they need to bid more to be in front. You need to understand, what switching costs you might have. So is to win the auction by a small margin or a large margin going to be necessary. Here's a little tip as well. Use non-whole numbers. You're more likely to be in a tied situation if you use whole numbers. If you've put £100 in, the competitors put £100 in, you're both tied, but you might not want to be tied. So why not put 99.9? So there's a, once you start bidding, be careful, be cautious, be intuitive, think about what you're doing and what you want to achieve. You want to get something from this as well, not just winning, you want feedback. And the other kind of things to think about on bidding is, are your bids legally binding? They would be in our tool, and the timescale is normally defined in the host documentation. So, be warned that this is not an exercise. I guess what we don't have in here is what you shouldn't do in an auction. You shouldn't be putting bids in that you can't sustain, because that wouldn't be very good for you. Everything you do goes against your reputation. You're trying to obtain information, and is the goal on this? You might be the incumbent, you might know there's big switching costs. Is your goal to end in the top 4, for example? You might not have to win. Also, don't forget the other lot. So, quite a number of times you might have one lot for item A, one lot for item B, and one lot for item A and B together. What we see time and time again is that suppliers will focus on the third lot, but they won't focus on the other 2. And if a host wants to split the award, it's very important. Don't forget the other lots. And also, don't wait until the last minute. Okay, this is a really important point. You have a dynamic close normally. So if a bid is put in the last 2 minutes, the auction will extend to 2 minutes. So it doesn't matter if you put the bid in the first 10 seconds of those 2 minutes or the last 10 seconds, it will still get extended to 2 minutes. So if you're thinking you can do what you do in eBay by putting a bid in without giving the suppliers time to react, unless the dynamic close is off, you don't want to leave it to the last minute, because you might put a bid in. And we do have checks and balances to see if a last minute bid was put in. But if you've got a problem with your internet, your bid might not get accepted, and then you might lose the business. And we have seen that, by the way, so be warned. Messages, is still myself? Yeah, I think so. So messaging, interesting. You can use messaging to your advantage. Look, hosts don't, people running these events don't want thousands and thousands of messages, but they do want to be informed of things that are necessary, of things that add value, and also they will communicate with you. So one supplier might have asked a question, found a mistake in the specification, and they'll send a message out to let everyone know about this. And by the way, we haven't had any questions yet. We've got quite a few on the webinar. So if you have any questions or anything that happened in your auctions, please send the questions in there. Hello Thomas. I think there was a little question there. But also try to understand the inner meaning of any messages. And what I mean by this, we at Market Dojo will always advise that any messaging given is transparent, honest, and available to all. They might have a preferred supplier, heaven forbid. They might have a particular message they're trying to get across to one supplier, but in the process of transparency, they send this to all. So you might need to work out whether the crux of that message is focused on one particular supplier, which might be yourself, or not. And don't forget, the way that you interact with the host, and I'll say this again, it shows, it impacts on your reputation. And are you someone they'd like to work with? Are you creating difficulties for them? So please, treat this messaging with a lot of respect, and try to use it to create that relationship with the buyer.
Yeah, exactly there, Alan. It's something we're going to touch on a little bit later, but at the end of the day, they're buying into people, they're buying into you guys as suppliers, and that relationship is key and is central focus. Not just myself, but everyone at Market Dojo can testify to the amount of times that we've had conversations with hosts, and they really want to ensure that their relationship with you guys is as good as possible. So, being clear, being concise, being transparent with them, and communicating effectively is a really important aspect of that.
Wonderful. And a very important, know your margins. We do hear occasionally, auctions are too price focused, might be a race to the bottom. You hear about the horror stories from it, but I think the key takeaway here is that, look, an auction is just a way to negotiate. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's a negotiation tool. After the auction, you might still have discussions, discuss the fluffy stuff, do everything else, but it's just a negotiation. Please don't get caught up in an auction and, bid, and then you have to tell your boss that you're going to lose on this deal. Before you go into the auction, and I think you discuss it as well, Craig, know your margins, know what you have to walk away from, know the kind of the revenue. Here we've got an example: revenue needed to earn £1 million profit. Know what your margins are, and that's really, really important. Okay, and I think if I just look at the slides there, and supply chain involvement is next. So I think that's exactly
perfect. Yeah, that's myself. So, as Alan was saying there, making sure that you're bidding at sustainable levels is a really important thing. No host wants you guys to be bidding at a point at which you can't, make your business work, because for them, most of the time, they see this as a very long-term arrangement. So it's a very focused part, which kind of comes really closely on to the next aspect, which is the supply chain involvement. Now, you guys, a lot of you guys are probably sales guys and working in the sales team, and if you ask hosts what they really value a lot of these suppliers that have a great relationship with their own supply chain. I might be stating the obvious here, I'm sure, to a number of you guys, but understanding your margins is an important aspect, but understanding your supply chain and how this tender or this business can affect and fits in with your business, and making sure that other aspects in your business and organization and the supply chain and all the different guys who are working to make your product or service that you're selling understand, all right, well, how much does it cost? What's the cost margins with this? Well, at what point does it become very difficult to sustainably develop this and grow? Getting a buyer to understand them and your needs, and you guys turning around to them and going, well, actually, I can use my own expertise. I mean, something we use here quite often, and a great example is it's the Heinz ketchup bottle. Heinz, they changed in terms of the manufacture from a glass bottle into a plastic bottle.
Microwave plastic tubs, weren't they?
Exactly. And obviously that's a very big kind of a suggestion that's come from the supplier to help Heinz manufacture this and price this effectively. It's a simple thing that often gets overlooked, but your expertise, your supply chain might be able to help more than you guys think. So getting them involved in the tender as well and getting them to understand what you guys are taking part on is a real big aspect. Now, the next aspect as well that within that is understanding your LLAs and your BATNA. Now, what is that? That is the lowest acceptable agreement level. Or your BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So it's the lowest level at which you can offer your product or services and your kind of final place bid. And if you're aware of what your supply chain and how involved they are and the costs and the margins they're doing, then and you could be transparent to the host of, look, this is the best price I can offer. They're going to appreciate that relationship, and they're going to understand that you're trying to do this sustainably, which really adds value to them. Which kind of comes straight onto our next point. Sorry, Alan,
these are standard negotiation terms you've probably heard of. You have the MDO, most desirable outcome, your LLA, your least acceptable agreement, and your BATNA, which is essentially what you're going to do if you don't get your LLA LAA? Are you just going to walk away? You can't take part in an auction unless you know these criteria. Otherwise, you're just going to keep on bidding, and that might end up being very problematic.
Fantastic. Well, on to the next aspect, which you'll see in front of you in a second, the incumbent. Now, obviously, some of you guys might not be aware of this term. What is an incumbent? Well, an incumbent is the current supplier or current provider that they are using. So if you look at it from the host perspective, that they might have an incumbent supplier, or they might not. But they might have an incumbent supplier which that they're currently using and not satisfied with, or maybe it's yourselves and they just want to ensure that they get the best negotiated price they can. But it's really basic for you guys to understand. All right, well, is there an incumbent supplier? And if there is an incumbent supplier, you've got to start thinking of things like switching costs. Now, switching costs are the costs associated with selecting one supplier over another supplier. So if we take it back to that bottle example that I used a few moments ago, in terms of the manufacture of the bottle, if they choose a different provider, how does it impact their business? Is there additional costs? Delivery times, delivery frequencies, does it affect their actual supply chain and the front they service? Do they need to get consultants or engineers in to be able to re-look at the things that they're doing? So, these things do come into consideration. And it's really good to have that in your mind and to maybe even ask the host, do you mind if I ask, is there switching costs involved? Is there anything that I should be aware of or that I could offer? And then that comes all the way back to what we're saying on the supply chain involvement, that maybe you can. Maybe there is something you can offer there. The next aspect I'm going to talk about quite quickly is the bid shadowing element. So what is bid shadowing? Because, it sounds all dark and everything. Essentially, bid shadowing is competing at an acceptable level behind a lead provider. So if you think of it as eBay, someone might be bidding, and what you could do is you could be constantly bidding just behind them, or just 1p more each time, and seeing how far they go. It's not something that we actively encourage. It's a strategy that you can use, but it's not the best strategy, because really you're defining yourself upon someone else and not your own criteria. You're not looking at your own margins. You're trying to see where the market is and what they're doing. Now, there's some easy ways to get around it. So I'm sure you guys probably find someone bid shadowing you during an event, and one of the easy ways to do that is to really, to understand where your levels are and just drop, rather than them following you in small decrements down, drop to a level which you think is acceptable, but might be a larger than them, because at the end of the day they're getting confidence from following you. They're getting confidence from constantly following you, so they're in second place, and they just slowly, every time you start bidding, they bid 1 pence more, and they continue down and down and down. Understanding that concept and how you can overcome it by just taking away the information from them, by really going into what can I deliver, how much can I deliver for, it's going to help you get the best out of it. And another aspect that we said there in terms of the incumbent is be open and honest. If you are the incumbent, it's really important for you to be at the level as a communicator. Can't stress that enough. We have seen during our times here where incumbents don't necessarily want to communicate. They've realised, oh, this is going to be an e-sourcing event. Maybe like some of you guys put in the poll earlier, don't like it. Whereas sometimes, as I say, it's a way of getting transparency for them and their stakeholders within a business. So as an incumbent, you might really want to communicate effectively and understand the value that they provide. And if they don't include some value, so service levels, delivery times, delivery frequencies, whatever it may be, go to the host, communicate with the host, say, oh, by the way, I'll take a look at your specification and this wasn't included. I know how you like deliveries on every Friday and you want these quantities. I want to make sure that if I'm bidding on this, is everyone else bidding on this? Because the host doesn't want you to be getting a penalty because of a lack of information on their part. So yeah, again, it comes right back to that information, to be really open. With it.
We've seen time and time again where an incumbent might, and in all fairness, it's actually not very often, but occasionally the incumbent will try to kibosh the process by not being flexible or accommodating with specifications, and generally 9 times out of 10 it will backfire. And there's little nuances like we've seen that help a lot. So I remember a freight tender that at number 99 you need to deliver the papers around the back door, for example, and those things cost. and you're doing the work. So those are the kind of things that the host needs to know about, so you get a fair crack of the whip when you're bidding against your potential competitors. And did you go into the graph as well, man?
No, I didn't actually. So
yeah, sorry. Okay, well the graph is here. You can see that the green and the blue ones are having a bit of a ding dong, exchanging positions, which is generally what will happen in a reverse auction. One of them might be the incumbent, or one of them might be a supplier who knows second place is enough. So what the person in green does to try and break away from the bid shadowing is drop the price in a large way, and then you can see a Mr. Blue here. I feel like Reservoir Dogs there. So Mr. Blue is then trying to find Mr. Green and doesn't quite achieve that, which puts Mr. Green in the winning side there. So there are ways to overcome that bid shadowing side of things.
Well, on to the next aspect that I know we've said before, and I'm going to reiterate again because it is so crucially important, is the relationship. E-auctions or e-sourcing events were created to allow hosts to be able to negotiate effectively with suppliers, typically in large volumes. But the key thing is they want to make sure they've got a good relationship with them. So it's really important for you to understand, how this relationship has been formed, where the relationship is, and understand why they choose to work with you guys or why they want to work with you. It's a sales technique and it's a sales saying that's been around for a long time. Is that people will always choose to work with people, and an e-auction, they don't want to take out the relationship. They want to leave that in, but you being able to connect, you being able to bid and to show that you're willing to negotiate and that you're willing to take part is going to be a real big impact into them choosing their preferred supplier, which also comes into the contact side of things. If you are the incumbent supplier, how regularly are you in contact? Sales guys, I'm sure a lot of you in it who are joining us in this webinar today, regularly communicate with your customers. But you also want to think of, how many times does your own supply chain contact them? Do you ever get other people in the business who are maybe involved in the day-to-day of delivering the goods to really speak to them and get them to speak to your host or the buyer to understand if there's anything they can do to improve? Because it's right here, everything you do impacts this. Everything you do impacts the relationship.
That's key. Everything you do, how you accept the invitation, how quickly you accept it, how you message them. These might seem small things to a supplier, but believe me, as people who are designing this platform, who talk to the procurement professionals regularly, that interaction, that speed of interaction, how you interact, actually makes a massive difference. At the end of an auction, it's normally buyer's choice. They'll bring the top few suppliers in. That interaction that you've had all through the process has a huge effect on how the host sees you. And you can really turn from being an outsider to being a real choice. Don't underestimate that even though you're not speaking to them verbally, everything you do impacts that vision of how they see you.
Which comes on to our next point, the bigger picture. Now, what is the bigger picture for you guys? This is, a thing. If you really want to get the most out of your resourcing events, you really want to win those auctions. What you've got to communicate and understand from the host is, what's the bigger picture? Is this the start of getting more value? Is this the start of an initial tender? Is there bigger business to be won there? Can this lead to more business? I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys, and I'm sure you're completely aware of this, but it's really important because that can affect your decision. The host doesn't want you to bid unsustainably, but if there is more work to come off the back of this, if this tender is for months, years, decades, that really might impact your decision and how you can bid and what bid levels you can do, because it's really going to impact how the buyer chooses the supplier. Are you going to choose someone who's just now been able to offer great value, but you're not sure if they're going to be around in a year's time? Well, no, as a host, of course you're not. You're going to choose someone who you think you've got a relationship with and can grow and can work with for a number of years. And it comes on to the point of, even if you don't win, you're gaining information. I've spoken in the past to some suppliers who take part in some of the freight auctions that are running in our system, and one or two of them I spoke to a while ago gave me the exact same feedback, which was they liked auctions. And when I was taken back a little bit, so I asked them, what is it that you like about auctions? And they were very focused, like, I get an answer. You know, in the freight industry, you know, you're competing and you're constantly competing. You're picking up the phone, you're offering bids and you're offering values. But you know, by actually taking part in an auction, I get an answer back telling me, you know, I've won the business. Which, you know, at the end of the day, I'm sure as you sales guys, you want to cheer and support.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, over to Alan now. He's going to talk a little bit about guides.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the renewal in the diary is a big thing that I wish some suppliers, because we use our tool ourselves, and I wish some suppliers who didn't win gave us a call in like 6-12 months, because you know, some suppliers don't perform, and to have that constant connection throughout the year. If it does go back to tender, it might not actually go back to tender. You've run a tender initially, you've got the options on the card, you know everyone. You might not win the first bite of the cherry, but if you constantly contact the host through the year, not in a overly zealous way, but just let them know you're there. That when it comes to renewal, if the other supplier's not performing, they might just try you out, and it would certainly, you know, as a purchaser myself, I think that would be something. And what we've got now is we've got a last poll. We're coming towards the end, another 5 minutes or so. So what we'd like to know is, has the webinar changed your perception of e-auctions? Note that if we're doing our job, and you know, we say we've got a lot of people attending today, and you know, no real questions there. So if anyone has any questions about anything, any auctions they've been involved with, or anything they don't understand, please just fire away there, and you can always contact us afterwards as well. So you know, please fire in some questions. In terms of the poll, has this webinar changed your perceptions of e-auctions? I think you can select multiple of them. So you know, do you feel more confident? Do you now see an opportunity where you may not have done beforehand? Are you indifferent? Do you still not value e-auctions? Is it I still not take part in auctions, which is the view from some organisations, rightly or wrongly? I guess you just need to have a view and stick with it and a plan. A lot of we've talked about today might seem quite trivial and common sense. However, when you approach an auction, please think of all these things, because they do actually, the implications behind the simple words sometimes, there's a lot more to it. So how are we doing, Toby? Are we 61%? Just a couple of seconds, and then we'll come on to the last few slides. I mean, in terms of ourselves, the idea of this webinar is just to put it out there. If you want any help with an auction, we can help with that. It's not something we usually do, in all fairness. Maybe you'll pass us on to your procurement teams. But here's a thought for you. You have suppliers and you have potential customers. Why not go to your customers or clients that you don't work with, and why not say to them, run an e-auction, involve us, and we'll prove to you we could add value. As a sales technique, when you're trying to get within an organisation, tell them, run an auction. We're happy, open, transparent, we'll prove we're the best. Or even, why not pass on to your suppliers and say, hey, you need to reduce your cost. Use Market Dojo or use an auction tool. And that's something actually that we see actually quite a lot. That people are engaged with suppliers and ask them to take on a tool to help them reduce their costs. And now just seeing the results of the poll, how did we do? Craig, did we do? So I now feel more confident, which is nice. I see the opportunity they present, which is fantastic. 57%. Indifferent, 19. Well, please get in contact. Let me know how we can help you more. I still do not value e-auctions, and I will not take part in auctions. Well, I would love to hear. We've got 5 minutes left. I would love to hear your reasons why. So please put a few questions in there and tell us why you may not want to take part in an auction. So apparently we have a question. I can't. Okay. Here's a question coming in. Do your hosts train suppliers to condition to bid differently I can't see the rest of that question.
So it's okay.
I'll
say it for you, Alan. So it's one of the questions that's been asked is, do hosts train suppliers to condition them to bid differently to the tactics you have proposed today? Well, I think one of the key things that we've tended to see is that hosts don't typically train suppliers to bid effectively. The reason why is because in one simple answer is they might be involving a lot of suppliers in a tender, so it might encourage them, and it's a lot of time and a lot of communication on a number of different things. I think some of the tactics that we've mentioned today are the most popular tactics used, and believe me, we do e-auction events sometimes where we get a room full of hosts to take part in an auction and see how they do, put them to the test as well. And one of the amazing things that we often see is that people don't realize necessarily some of the tactics that they use. Some of these strategies to try and get them in. But typically, some of the example ones that we see, which are terrible, are the one who comes in with the first bid. Oh, this is my best bid on this particular lot. That's me done. And as we've discussed today, it should be so reflective of how negative that could be in comparison with slowly reducing your bid and communicating effectively with the host. Do you have any points on that, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I don't think they do. I don't think it's in there. I mean, so it depends on the type of auction. So some, if it's a pure, the auction might just be price focused, number one wins, which is a bit, is a slightly different. Generally, not about 10% maybe run with that, if that. Generally, I think just hosts will let suppliers know how it works, leave it up to them. So the things that you could take away from this webinar, I think the host would like you to know that. They'd like to know how to bid properly. They don't want people to go out of business. They want people to know that it's a buyer's choice, for example. So I think that's very, very important. And we have another question really about support during an auction. So it's a good question. I mean, I can't speak necessarily from the other platforms, but at Market Dojo, we fully support suppliers. So, if you do have an issue during an auction, you should phone in, and please don't leave it to the last minute. And please also don't register for an auction on 10 minutes before it happens. You might have a problem. You might have a PQQ, pre-qualification questionnaire you need to answer, and if you don't answer that, you won't get to the next level.
And that's exact, great point that you bring there. I mean, when we do see issues with suppliers taking part in auctions, which is very infrequent, the vast majority tend to be on their side and with their security protocols that they put in place. And if I don't know if they're using a computer that was developed in 1960s. So we always encourage all of our suppliers to make sure get in the tool first, see it, understand it. There's lots of guides which I know Alan's going to talk about now, which might be able to help you. But yes, get in communication with us, because our support is here to help you and help the hosts and make sure people are running successful e-sourcing events.
Yeah, fantastic. That's very true. I got some thing on the guides and then another question. We have, if you look on the widget on your right-hand side, you'll see handouts. We'll send this presentation out afterwards. We have some great handouts to also support this webinar today. Do, don't, and not allowed, psychology of online negotiation, some blog articles, and some process guides. So please, have a look at those guides, download those guides. We do have another question as well. If a supplier submits the lowest bid but loses the auction due to waiting, what feedback do you recommend in the debrief? Well, it's a really interesting one. That, I mean, our tool, we actually developed our tool a long time ago to be very open and transparent about this. So if it's on our tool, you would see your questionnaire score, you would see your price score, and you would know your overall score. You need to really, before you go to an auction, if it's before we get to you might lose, you really need to look at how the scoring is made up, how the price scoring is made, how they're combining the scores. That will affect how you bid. If you do really badly on a questionnaire, for example, depending on how the things are added together, you might have absolutely no chance of being in first place. You don't know that, so please, before an auction starts, ask the question to how the weighting mechanisms work, how you see that during an auction, or if the weighting is going to be done after an auction. Ours is all live on our platform, but you don't necessarily get that with every platform. If you do lose, then I would be very, you go back to the host, be open and honest, say, look, you've done this to get more feedback. ask them, what can they share with you? What was your questionnaire score? How were they combined? How did you lose? What could you have done differently? Look, you've spent a lot of time in this process, and I would hope that any buyer would appreciate that, and also feedback as well.
That's exactly great points there, Alan, because I think very much so is that, that, as we've said throughout this webinar, the relationship that you've got with the host, the communication that we've got with them is crucially vital. It is vitally crucial in ensuring that you get the most out of your resourcing event. So if you have that relationship, if you have that level of communication with them, ask them, try to explain the situation, try to understand. I mean, if this does happen, and it's a great question because it very infrequently does, but go and try and understand if anything may have been scored incorrectly, or if your interpretation wasn't wrong in terms of questionnaire. Some of these things, people's conceptions and ideas of these things can be slightly different. So I could be asking us what I think is a simple question, whereas you might answer it in a slightly complicated way. So get that relationship out there, get that communication out there, ask them, see what you can do, and please do it before the auction, because it really will help you.
Yeah, and we wrote a blog on this as well about tender evaluation and non-linearity. Our scoring mechanisms, not based on anything, but they're very linear, very logical. We've seen some mechanisms out there at the moment for combining price and non-price elements, which are non-linear, don't really help you very much. I've seen this a fair bit in the public sector. Please give us a call. Happy to give a bit of informal advice. So, use this as an open book there. We're going towards the end now. Okay, just another little question come in. Does it cost to take part on our platform? No, it doesn't. We never charge the suppliers. We're not a favour of that. I know some platforms do, but we don't. Thank you there for the question, Mr. C. Just on coming to the close now. So some of the big fans, look, we've got a large customer base. We've got a lot of experience in this area. Myself and Craig have been here for a long time, but myself maybe a bit longer. Please feel free to contact us. If you do want to pass on to procurement departments, we're flexible, we're effective, we're different, we're transparently priced, we're easy to use. Please be in touch if we can help you in any way. If you like the webinar, get in touch, let us know if we can help. Otherwise, we have a conference on the 17th of October. Generally, this is all headed more towards the procurement professionals. So if you have procurement people in your team you'd like to invite to this, or from your supplier base, please do. We'll send out everything after this, probably write up a few blogs. Apart from that, it's been an absolute pleasure to offer some encouragement to our, the suppliers who register on our system. It's been wonderful.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. Take care now. Bye.